Shihoko Goto is the Senior Northeast Asia Associate with the Wilson Center's Asia Program. She joins us today to discuss the recent meeting between Presidents Trump and Abe during President Trump's legendary Asia visit. Welcome, Shihoko. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I see a piece you wrote where you talked about a bromance.
Right.
What's going on between Shinzo and Donald, as the hat that was given to Trump as a present from President Abe said, do you remember what Donald and Shinzo make alliance even greater?
Right. Well, there is a personal rapport between the two men, if only because they both really enjoy golf. And the point, though, is that Abe is really prepared to go out of his way to reach out on a personal level to Donald Trump in a way other foreign leaders are not. So he has really been the first leader to meet with Donald Trump after he was elected into office. He was the first one to actually see him at Trump Tower. He was the first foreign leader to actually play a round of golf with him at Mar-a-Lago. He's actually been able to invite him to Japan to play golf with him yet again in Japan. So there's this personal connection. But at the same time, one analyst said that with Donald Trump, you're only one tweet away from being excommunicated. So it is a very dicey relationship on a personal level because it is obviously not a balanced, it is not a friendship amongst equals. Trump is always going to have the upper hand and Abe is always going to be subservient to that.
And do you have any sense, I know it'd be hard to tell from the outside looking in, is this a personal affinity or is this a purely strategic maneuver by Abe?
Well, we have to bear in mind that before the American elections, Japan actually took a very unique position insofar as Tokyo made an active effort to express its displeasure with Trump and lobbied hard to support Hillary Clinton. So obviously, that means that the personal respect that that Abe might have had for Trump was not there initially. But now that he's been elected and he is in office and he's been democratically elected, that the
you
Japanese—
work with the person who's
exactly, you work with the will of the American people and there is that kind of respect.
Is there any element of this that's a reaction to this sort of uneasy relationship he had with President Obama?
That's very difficult to say, but it is certainly something that Japan needs to do given the current situation in Asia. It is an increasingly dangerous neighborhood fraught with many risks, and Japan, although it is increasing its military capabilities, it is very much under the security umbrella of the United States. So strong U.S. support for Japan is critical for Japan's very existence. And so when you talk about the hat, talking about the alliance becoming greater, it is gimmicky, it is cheesy. I don't think either man actually wore the hat, so who knows where it's gone. But it does express a great desire, certainly on the Japanese side. It is fun, and it's cute, and they both, and I should also add on a personal level, the Japanese have really tried to accommodate Trump's personal tastes. So at the golf course, they ate hamburgers, American beef-made hamburgers as well. So
make sure you have extra ketchup for
absolutely.
President Trump's taste. So beyond the personal, beyond the soap opera, or the bromance, as you characterized it, what is the substance that was discussed during their time together?
Well, first and foremost, North Korea. They're actually on the same page on this. Japan obviously is in a very different situation from the United States. The U.S. concern is that North Korean missiles could possibly hit the U.S. mainland, that North Korea could be a threat to the United States. It already is for Japan. The long-range missiles have already gone over Japan. It is easily within striking distance from North Korea. So that puts Japan in a very different boat from the United States. But at the same time, Abe is supportive of Trump's two positions, namely to not accept a nuclear North Korea. And the other option is the willingness to consider all options. That is to include the possibility of having a military strike, right, a war against North Korea as well. And that's a very different tone.
So with that in mind, do you see North Korea as a tipping point for Japan in its post-World War II military posture? Is this going to be the threat that changes the way Japan approaches its own military?
That is certainly what Abe wants. Now, he is personally desiring a change in the Japanese constitution. Bear in mind that since the end of World War II, Japan has had a pacifist constitution imposed on by the United States. There has been no change made to it, and the clause, Article 9, which insists that Japan refrain from taking on the ability to strike as an option, that should be taken out. So that is something that Abe will continue to pursue.
Is there popular support for that?
Not necessarily. Given the current situation with North Korea, there is more sympathy to that idea. However, if there were to be constitutional change, not only does it have to have approval by 2/3 of the upper as well as 2/3 of the lower houses, but also it has to go through a public referendum where half of the voters agree to it. And that's, as we know from public referendums and the election process, things don't necessarily pan out the way we are expecting. And so if Abe were to take this to the polls, it's not necessarily a shoo-in, even though he has had a supermajority win in the latest elections a couple of weeks ago.
Beyond North Korea, which is the issue of the moment for all kinds of reasons, imperatives. What about the trade discussion, where President Trump has been critical not just of Japan, of all kinds of countries about trade imbalance? Is this something that President Abe is prepared to address?
It is something that has come up heavily in the bilateral summit repeatedly, not just in Tokyo, but also in Washington and before pre-election. Trump has really focused on a lot of the trade issues. It's been something that he's focused on since he's been a business executive for the last few decades. For Japan, U.S.-Japan trade relations are strong, but the biggest U.S. trade deficit, second only to China, is Japan. So this is a big issue. Japan has wanted the United States to remain part of the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, with 12 member countries. With the American pullout of it, Japan is continuing to pursue a TPP without the United States. And it's trying very hard to not have to commit to a bilateral free trade agreement with the United States. That's because Japan has made considerable concessions already to be part of the TPP. And if it were to do a bilateral, it would have to concede even more on critical sectors such as the car sector and the agricultural sector as well. That said, this issue keeps on coming up. So what they have agreed upon, both Washington and Tokyo, is to split this issue into two. So on the one hand, you have the president and the prime minister talking about security issues, and then the economic, including trade issues, have been spun off to the vice ministerial, the vice presidential level between Mike Pence and Taro Aso. So the argument being that if it's not within the portfolio of Trump, perhaps he won't be as emotional about it, and it doesn't become a sore
Given
point.
the nature of the North Korean threat, it makes some sense to not distract from that focus.
Right.
A final thought is beyond Trump-Abe and the North Korea situation. For President Abe in Japan, a new strengthened hand after the election, what are the other challenges that he is dealing with?
Well, domestically, this issue of constitutional reform, and really constitutional reform is the first step of the ultimate aim of being, for creating a Japan that is more muscular, a Japan that has as much political and military influence as it does on the economic front. Bear in mind that even though Japan's economy has been lackluster for the past 2 decades, it still remains the third largest economy. It is a country that does have a lot of sway in Asia.
And soft power. They've
and
been influential culturally.
And a lot of soft power as well. And Abe is a leader who really does believe that Japan should have greater influence and impact. And there are a lot of countries at this moment, given the seeming retreat of the United States from the Asia-Pacific region on the one hand, and a greater influence of China on all realms, not just economic, but on the military front and on just a vision for Asia, that there should be some kind of competition, a alternative vision to that China-led hierarchy in the region as well. So certainly that is something that Abe will want to really pursue. But there's opposition from other countries, especially neighboring China and Korea, to that effort. There's also opposition within Japan that the public is not as wanting of that greater role for Japan. The other issue for Japan,
some baggage comes with that, right?
Of course, with power comes responsibility.
Yes.
And that is not necessarily the responsibility that a lot of Japanese want to take on.
I said that was my final question, but I'm going to cheat and ask you one more because you brought up China. Remarkably, we talked about Asia and Japan and the U.S., and until now, we didn't mention the word China.
Right.
Is Japan in a position to sort of play China and the U.S. against each other in a way? I don't mean in some sort of hyper manipulative way, but what is the situation of the relations between Japan and China? And China's desire to be the world power,
right.
certainly the economic world power, and the U.S. after the withdrawal from TPP, kind of playing catch up in the region.
Right. Well, China is undoubtedly the regional hegemon. It is the biggest economic, political, military power in the region, bar none. And Japan cannot compete with that at all, and it doesn't want to, and it doesn't even try to. But at the same time, what Japan is trying to really push for at the moment is to be able to offer an alternative to China, to say that China's influence doesn't mean that there aren't other options. Mm-hmm. And the other option really is to say we need a rule of law to prevail. We need fair and open trade. We need human rights to be respected. We need democracy to flourish. These are visions that other democracies, not just in the United States, but in Europe as well, share. And that is something that Japan will really try to push for and rally other Asian countries in Southeast Asia in particular.
So less of a cooperator and more of a foil to China in the region.
Exactly.
Yeah. Shihoko, thank you very much.
Thank
it's always
you.
fascinating to speak with you about this and look forward to doing it again.
Thanks very much.